Good afternoon. Instead of playing a couple of games this afternoon, I'm going to analyse a game. I don't have much time actually. I've got to go to a course on how to deal with a fire alarm at work. Important thing to know if something happens at night. But instead of playing a game, I'm going to analyse a game from one of my students who, him and his younger brother were in a tournament in Germany last weekend. And when we were at the club last night, we went through a game he played, an analysis. He played against a 1850 FIDE player with the black pieces. Let's see what happens. Okay, his opponent plays d4, f6, knight f3. This is to make it less effective to play the bishop here for a Nimzo Indian. It's known as a, well, it isn't there yet as a anti-Nimzo variation, but it gets there. So pawn comes to e6, great, a very flexible move. Now it's known as the anti-Nimzo Indian defense, because if the knight came to c3 here instead of f3, the bishop could come here and pin the knight, and that's the Nimzo Indian. So what he plays d5, great, queen's gambit declined, lovely. The knight comes out, and he supports the pawn with the pawn. Excellent, excellent semi-Slav defense. The bishop comes to d5, g5 even, the so-called anti-Merlin gambit. This and the Merlin gambit were played a great deal by Kasparov and Karpov in their fantastic series of World Championship matches. I think both of them played it. And around the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, it was an extremely popular variation in the Queen's Gambit decline. So the modern knight defense. So he isn't actually threatening to win this pawn because it's covered. But is my student going to go for the Cambridge Springs defense? Pawn to e3? No, he goes for the bishop. Similar idea, and it works just as well for my student. Bishop comes to e3, but then, you know, the queen doubles up, and how now does he defend the pawn? He can't defend with the rook, or, you know, the pawn here falls. If he defends with the queen, then it's that old business of take the pawn here, play the knight here, and you're pinning the pawn and attacking the bishop 2 times. So he's going to win a pawn. Great. Instead of brilliant reaction to the threat, he doesn't just knee-jerk react. I'll take that pawn. No, this is a check. It wins me a pawn. I've got a move to spare, so he plays the check, and he takes the pawn with check. And he doesn't want to play queen here because then the rook would fall. He probably should have played. Oh no, if he plays knight here, the bishop falls. So yeah, but maybe king to f1 would have been a better move. But yeah, so now he's not got castle and knights. He's lost a pawn. Things are looking good. So extra queenside pawn. What does he do? Swaps off. Of course he does. You're leading by a pawn. Swap off at every opportunity. Swap off again. Knight comes to a fantastic position on d5 where it kind of dominates the center of the board. Great. This was another, when we discussed this last night, this is the first time of me looking at it really with analysis. When we discussed this last night, I said, what a good move. You know, instead of just automatically castling, the roots can be united by putting the king on e7. It's an end game. The king belongs in the center and as far forward as possible. So that's a great move. Really, really pleased. a3 stops the knight from coming to this square. I don't know that on this board that knight would be so much better than this bishop. This board is fairly close, so the knights could be better than the bishops. But anyway, the bishop's develops to d7 and he attacks the b pawn. comes to b6. I like as well that reasonably soon, black player, my student, gets all these pieces on dark squares. Well, as many pieces as he can on dark squares white, so that the bishop doesn't see them. I just want you to understand, I'm not showing this to show off what a fantastic coach I am, because my students achieved this great game. My students achieved this great game because he's a good student, because he works hard, and not least because he thinks about chess. He doesn't just, well, he does play a lot of bullet as well where he doesn't think about chess, but, generally he thinks about chess, And yeah, he said that, want to discuss the possibility of the Cambridge Springs defence with him. He said, yeah, I've seen that, but there's this idea as well. I thought I'd try that. And that's good. That's good. So this idea as well, I thought I'd try that. So he thought about it and came up with another idea which could win him a pawn. So the pawn comes to f6, another pawn on a dark square where the bishop can't see it and where it doesn't restrict his own bishop. Pawn comes to e4 and the knight comes to c7. At the moment there's no chance of a successful break in the middle, put it that way. Obviously, if he takes the pawn here, then his opponent can take it with the knight and threaten the bishop and threaten the pawn, so he's not going to be doing that. So he plays knight to d5. Knight goes back where it came from on that fantastic square. Yeah, another piece on a dark square. Now we've only got these four, which tie each other together nicely, and this rook on light squares. Bishop comes and he takes a pawn. All swaps are good for him. And the rook comes to a dark square. Great. The knight, really good square for the knight, just as good, if not better than this square for this knight. Rook comes to a dark square. I think he's got other things on his mind than just that, but it's said as an important point. Pawn comes to a dark square, so everything except these two are on dark squares where the bishop can't see them. This isn't the case for white, who has this bishop on a light square at the least. So pawn comes to f5. He doesn't really want to swap off and improve that bishop, so he moves the knight. It's a good square. And also he's now thinking he can come to e8 and chase away this knight from this wonderful outpost. A little bit of expansion, but it weakens the pawns, and this pawn weakening here turns out to be one of the decisive elements in the game. Yeah, bishop attacks the rook whilst it's on a light colour square. Great. And he can't play to a3, d3 to try and occupy the e file, d file, because the bishop would come here and pin the rook to the king. So here's come. There was a problem if he'd come here. Obviously, if he comes here, then knight can come here, and then the knight is forced to be swapped off because it's threatening the rook as well. So yeah, but he threatens to swap off the knights anyway, and it turns out this knight is beautifully placed on e8. I know there's the old saying, knight on e8 there is no mate, but actually this knight is in a wonderful position, controlling the important f6 and d6 squares, c7, defending this pawn. She just couldn't be doing more, and threatening to get rid of that knight. So the knight has to move, and the rook comes and attacks two pawns immediately. Great. And king comes to f3 to defend the bishop. The knight is defended by the king. And now an absolutely fantastic move. Rook, bishop to d1. Yeah, great. Check. Checked all checks, and sees that this check gives him an attack on the g pawn. King comes to g4, but he can just take that, because if he takes back, then he just takes the rook here. Or indeed, he could yeah, just takes the bishop here and says check, and this pawn will fall eventually. So yeah, he's now got 6 pawns against 4, 2 pawns up, good position. He takes the pawn, and the bishop takes, threatens the knight, and he's also threatening to, at some point in time, come in here and force off the bishops. So knight comes to d2, knight comes to c7. He can also play knight here. The king attacks, and he plays knight to d5 check. He doesn't panic, doesn't run away. He does the sensible thing and says check. Now, he's got a choice. Does he take with the rook, or he takes with the bishop? He takes with the rook. I think that's correct, because it gives his rook more choices. So he takes with the rook and threatens the pawn. And his rook still controls one of the only 2 open files. And he attacks the knight. And maybe he could have played rook here to control another open file, but there's nothing wrong with doubling up the rooks. Yeah, says check, king comes to f7 to attack the knight, and now the bishop is attacked by the rook. Great reaction, great reaction. When you're attacked, you can move the piece that's attacked. So he could play bishop to h5 or f5, for example. Or you can defend the attack piece. He could play pawn to h5, for example. Or you can make your own threat, and often making your own threat is more powerful. And that's what he does. He plays a check. And the king comes to f1, f2. So he forces off a pair of rooks. Fantastic. And now these 3 pawns are all isolated, and these 5 pawns are all together, and white isn't long for this world. So he comes to d3, e3 again. So the bishop is still threatened. So the rook is threatened. He could think about coming rook here, but it isn't the best move. He calmly plays the best move, which is to defend the rook, the bishop, even with the rook. The knight cuts off the bishop from the defense of the rook, but the bishop comes to e5, f5 even. He's threatening to play rook e4 check and win this pawn. So he's got a double attack on the g7 pawn. He plays g6. He could also have played g5, but g6 is perfectly good. And the knight comes, and the king comes c6. He's perfectly happy for that knight to be taken, swap off, and then this pawn's going to fall. And the king can defend this pawn, and the rook can play here and attack this pawn and defend this pawn, and he will be getting a new queen soon. And so white resigned. Fantastic win for my student, and as I say, the fantastic win, and his progress as a chess player is due to his hard work, not to his foolish coach. Yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share my videos. Thanks. Bye.